We're going to bring up the behavior people because sometimes the children, ours, all of them, as many as we have, sometimes the behavior really diminishes the quality of our lives, right? We want to just sell them to the nearest neighbor or try to figure out how best to manage their behaviors and our own in turn, because sometimes they push your buttons and the buttons are so pushed that it's kind of out of the door. So we have 3 experts to talk about this. We have James Poysky, we have Amy Wagner, Amy Wagers, sorry, and we have Denise Gruender. And so each of these people are going to take a different aspect of how do you manage these behaviors? How do you, in the face of this diagnosis and a temper tantrum, not say, let's just get cupcakes? That might be my... I didn't know there was cupcakes. Yeah, cupcakes, yeah, that's my go-to, yeah. So James and Amy and Denise are going to talk about both at home and cupcakes and at school, and how to think through the behaviors and how to manage those behaviors so that everyone keeps their sanity going forward. Here's James.
I can introduce myself. Okay. Thanks, Pat. And I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist, which is basically a psychologist with extra training in how the brain works. But I also have a 16-year-old son who has Duchenne. So maybe that gives me a little bit more legitimacy, although if you've met my kids, you'll know that I totally do not know what I'm talking about. So take it with a grain of salt. Today I'm going to be talking about Duchenne. I didn't mean it to sound redundant like that. And how do I advance the slides? Oh, novel. Okay. So this is a topic that I feel really passionate about, and I think that it's really important. I think that there's probably a lot of new families, newly diagnosed families in this session, which is probably why this was scheduled at this time, because this is something that we face a lot as professionals, a lot of uncertainty or indecision that families have and parents have about talking about Duchenne. And I've met a lot of people. A lot of them really are very uncomfortable with this topic. And I run across a lot of people who have a lot of reasons to not talk about Duchenne with their child who has Duchenne. And these are all actually on the screen. I've listed a number of different, maybe excuses sounds too judgmental, but a number of different reasons that I've actually heard in real life about why people do not want to talk to their son about Duchenne. And there can be a number of reasons, and I think some of them are maybe a little bit more rational than others, but oftentimes we hear that they want to protect the child. They don't want the child to experience distress, or that they don't want to limit the child's dreams. And by explaining to them that they have Duchenne, that they will basically not have any dreams and will give up on life. I think oftentimes where it's really coming from, and this is completely understandable, but a lot of times where it's coming from is discomfort on the part of the adult when it comes to talking about this topic. It's really important to talk about Duchenne, though, with the people who have Duchenne for a number of different reasons. On one hand, it's pretty much impossible to keep it a secret. It takes a lot of energy, it's very stressful, it wears families down, and it just doesn't work. I've had people who've come into the clinic to see me, and they bring their 16-year-old son in, and they pull me aside and they say, "Don't mention Duchenne. He doesn't know he has Duchenne." And so I'm thinking, they're coming to the muscular dystrophy clinic, and the kid doesn't know they have muscular dystrophy. And so I've turned to the kid and I've said, "You know why you're here, right?" And they're like, "Yeah." But still, some people really hold really tightly onto this perception that they do not want the child to know. And it really wears the family down. It's also really important to not send the message to your kid that we keep secrets, that we don't talk about difficult things, or that's really going to come back to bite you down the road, right? It's also really important just for the child's ability to cope with their condition to have knowledge. Imagine if you went to an oncologist because you'd had some tests, and you go in and the oncologist says, "Wow, we've got some difficult tests, but I'm not going to share those with you because I don't want to ruin your day." It'd feel pretty weird, right? Same sort of thing with kids. They know that something's going on, and the best way to help them cope with that situation is to give them information to do that. We also want to make sure that we're sending them the message that we trust them to be able to deal with life. And if we're talking about promoting independence long term, if we're talking about them living on their own and advocating for themselves, we can't tell them that we don't trust them to deal with stuff like this. It's really important also to keep in mind, and we see this in a number of different disorders or medical conditions, that kids actually cope pretty well with their condition, like far better than we give them credit for, but they need information to do that. And it's also really important to keep in mind too that as parents, our job isn't to protect our kids from everything. It's not to shelter them and wrap them in bubble wrap, but really it's to teach them how to deal with life's difficulties. And this is a part of that process in helping them do so. I think I'm going to kind of skip over this because I kind of addressed this with my last slide. One thing that I want to reassure parents about is that in most cases, having conversations about Duchenne is a much bigger deal to us. It's much more traumatic for us as parents than it actually is for the child themselves. You know, this is kind of a standard, it's a bit of a cliche, but I can't tell you how many times I've talked to families, and the story goes something like this. Well, we scheduled a family meeting, and we sat down, and we were going to talk about Duchenne. And we were really nervous about it. We were really scared. We didn't know how it was going to go. We didn't know how our son was going to react. And so we tentatively started kind of talking about it, and we started talking about it a little bit more, and our child kind of sat there and nodded his head, maybe asked a question. And then when we were all done, we said, so what do you think? And the kid said, okay, so what's for dinner? That's a pretty common reaction. Like, kids tend to digest information much better than what we give them credit for, but I think sometimes we build it up into a bigger deal in our heads. It's also okay to make a mistake. Like, at some point when talking about Duchenne, you're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to mess up, you're going to say something awkward or just flat out wrong, and that's okay. It's also okay to realize that you don't have all the answers and to be okay with that. Like, there's some ambiguity, there's some uncertainty, obviously, as a part of this, and that's okay. It's also okay to get emotional. Like, you don't have to be the solid rock. You don't have to be the one who's completely in control of everything. Because honestly, a part of what we want our kids to learn is how to manage and deal with difficult emotions. It's not to have no emotions at all, but it's really about how to deal with it. So that's okay. Like, if you break down crying or you get upset, like, that just shows that you're human. Now, obviously, you also want to show how to successfully navigate those feelings and cope with those feelings, but you don't have to be all happy and rock solid the whole time. It's also important to keep in mind that there's never a good time to talk about Duchenne. I have a lot of families who say, okay, well, we're waiting for this moment or that moment, or, you know, we just want to make sure that it's going to be the best sort of situation. It's never a good time. Just in terms of practicalities, like, you know, we're all busy, we're running around, there's never kind of a quiet moment, but also there's never a time that's stress-free. There's never a time where the child is completely, everything is going absolutely well, and that's the perfect time to talk about Duchenne. Real life's not like that. So you have to kind of pony up at a certain point and kind of put your foot down and say, okay, we're going to talk about it tonight. It's also important to keep in mind that the earlier you start talking about it, the better. I have a lot of families who say that we want to wait till they're a certain age, or when they're old enough, they'll be able to deal with it better. But the problem is, the longer you wait, the more awkward it gets. We started talking about Duchenne with my son when he was about 3 years old, and he didn't understand everything. But at this point now, it's just kind of a regular conversation, like it's no big deal. If we talk about Duchenne, something comes up, like it's just a normal part of our kind of daily routine, if you will. So the earlier, the better. And it's also important to keep in mind that it's never a once and done. It's kind of an evolving discussion. You're just starting the process. You're just opening the door. And it's something where you don't have to answer all the questions and have absolute understanding on the part of the child right from the get-go. People often ask me cognitively, language-wise, at what point should we start? Well, in general, and this isn't specific to Duchenne, but most kids, once they reach about a 3 or 4 year old age level cognitively, they can start to get some understanding. And that's usually kind of the best time when you start talking about stuff, because they're not going to understand everything, but that's how you help them understand what Duchenne is you start that conversation, and then they grow into it as they cognitively mature. Some people often ask me, well, how do I start talking about this conversation? And sometimes a good starting point can be asking them what they think is going on. Well, why do you think we go see the doctor? Well, what's your impression of what's happening? Do you ever feel different? Do you ever notice that maybe you have a hard time keeping up on the playground? That can give you a good understanding about maybe where their starting point is, what their level of understanding is to begin with. That can also give you a chance to correct any misinformation that they might have. You want to try to provide basic, simple explanations for what's happening, and it's going to make the most sense if you relay it in terms of how it impacts their daily experience. So what it means on the playground, what it means when they're in the doctor's office, what it means when they're playing with their friends. That's going to mean the most to the child, and that's going to cause it to sink in the most. It is important to cover a few key points. One of those points, obviously, is the child didn't get this because there's something bad about them or there's something wrong with them. This is something that they were born with. You want to also be sure you explain that when you're showing emotion or you're upset about something, you want to tell the child that you're not mad at them or you're not upset about them, because sometimes, especially with younger kids, that might be how they interpret it. So you want to be really clear about that. You also want to project an air of positivity and hope, yet at the same time, be realistic about things. In particular, you want to explain things at a level that they are able to grasp things without necessarily extrapolating on everything that might happen in the future. In large part, and I don't say that to be deceptive, but in large part because we don't really know. There's been so much change lately and things have been progressing so fast. We don't really know where things are going to be. At the same time, sorry, I'm going to skip ahead one more. I'll come back to that. You don't want to avoid difficult questions. You don't want to avoid questions like, am I going to die? What's going to happen to me? Because kids are really good about picking up on when you're not providing answers, when you're skipping over a question, when you're kind of deflecting the question. So you don't want to ignore, you don't want to basically not answer questions like that. But at the same time, it is important to answer things in an honest yet also positive and hopeful manner. It's really important at some point in the discussions about Duchenne that you ask them to explain back to you what you said. You never ever want to ask, do you understand? Because what's the answer every time? Yes, even when it's no. So say it back to me, explain it back to me. Now, what did I just say? If they can't explain it back to you, then that gives you a chance to explain it again. If you've done that a couple of times and they still can't explain it back to you, it's been too complex. Maybe you need to kind of simplify things a little bit. Also, you have to take into account that some kids have a delay in their language when they have Duchenne, in particular their expressive language. And so sometimes you have to help kind of fill in the gaps a little bit or kind of provide them with some prompts to help get them going. Some people say that you should never use a diagnosis, the term of a diagnosis or the name of a diagnosis, because the child doesn't know what that means. But actually, most experts, and I would say I believe this as well, it's important to actually start using the name at an early age when they don't understand, because that's how you help them understand what that name means, what that term means. And also, by using the correct terms, by using the correct diagnoses, over time, that's going to equip them with the vocabulary they need to advocate for themselves when they get older. And you can't use these terms and then all of a sudden start using them when they're 18 and you're expecting them to be independent. Like, it doesn't happen that way. You've got to start filling up their vocabulary early. Obviously, you want to avoid using negative adjectives or negative terms that don't really contribute to the conversation but portray things in an overly negative way. It's not unusual for some kids to refute what you're saying. It's not unusual for them to say, no, my muscles are fine. I don't have Duchenne. I'm just like everybody else. That's a normal part of the coping process. Like, I'm not a huge Kubler-Ross fan, but it's kind of like everybody goes through the denial phase. And it's like that for kids too. In that moment when they're saying that, you don't have to pick that time to convince them otherwise. They'll come around. And you don't need to make a big deal out of it. Sometimes it just takes a while for people to get there. But you can expect that reaction, and it's not an unusual reaction. You may also have some kids who actually have a very strong emotional reaction to this discussion. They become very upset. Now, I'd say this is a very small percentage. I think I've only run across maybe a handful of people out of the hundreds that I've talked to who've had this experience. But it can happen. And again, keep in mind that sometimes a part of coping with difficult situations is feeling some distress. That's what helps you work through it. Now, obviously, we don't want the person to kind of get stuck there and stagnate there, but like, if you're in a crappy situation, like, it's normal to have some distress about that. Like, we're all like that. And so we can't necessarily be too quick to jump in and make it go away right away. Sometimes you have to be present with people in that moment, and you have to provide some empathy and connect with them and help them and let them experience those emotions to help them go through that coping process. So you might get some of that. I don't want to say that it's always going to be easy to have these kinds of discussions, but again, that's normal and that's expected. And it's honestly almost more surprising when we don't see an emotional reaction, even though that's the vast majority of people's experience. Now, I'm kind of moving fast here, so you can always jump in later and ask me questions. But another thing that we think is really important is talking with peers about Duchenne. And in general, or more specifically, in particular, classmates. When other kids do not understand a medical condition, they're much more likely to tease. They're much more likely to ask intrusive or annoying questions because they just don't understand. The most classic one is like, why are you so short? Or how can you be in 3rd grade when you're like the size of a kindergartner? There can be a tendency to reject the child who has a medical condition when they don't understand, or probably more likely is just they don't think to include that child. They're not aware that that child can't keep up in the same way. And we see that when kids are educated about a classmate's medical condition, they're much more likely to be protective of the child, they're much less likely to tease the child, and they're obviously much less likely to ask annoying and intrusive questions. Now, you're going to have, in every class, there's going to be a mean kid who's going to tease no matter how much education you provide, right? But for that one child who is mean, you have 10 other kids who might ask annoying questions or reject the child because they just don't understand. Those are the ones really that we're targeting, and those are the ones that we can make the biggest difference with. But we do see that actually other classmates too are much more likely to be protective of the child and to stick up for the child against that mean kid if they know what's going on. So people have different takes on this. Like when I was in graduate school, they always said you have to ask the child whether you're allowed to do this or not, whether you're allowed to share information with their classmates about their medical condition. So we notified my son's classmates, or we educated them about Duchenne for 3 years, and then we asked him, is it okay if we do this? Actually, we didn't tell him the first few years. We asked him if it's okay if we do this, and he said no. And so we decided that we were going to respect that, and we didn't do it. That was the worst year that we ever had. Every year that we did share with his classmates, I wouldn't say that his experiences were always awesome, but it definitely did make a big difference. And so I know this is probably not ethical or appropriate, but I usually tell people, you know what, I think you need to make the decision to talk to classmates whether your son wants it or not, because it's going to, in general, make their year better. However, you can ask, to what extent do they want to be involved? Do you want to be present? Do you want to be in the classroom? Do you want to be part of the presentation? Do you just want to sit there and not say anything? Do you want to be part of the question and answer period? Do you want to not be in class that day? Do you not want to go to school that day? You kind of give them some options. I think that maybe gives them a little bit more sense of control. But I usually recommend you kind of lay down the law and say this is going to happen whether you like it or not. Sorry, I know that's not ethical, but anyway. Now, when talking to peers, they just need the real simple explanations. They don't need it real complex, comprehensive. They don't need all the details. But you do want to explain, give some basic examples of how it affects daily life. Usually we have we mention things like muscles not being as strong, muscles not working as well, harder to run, slower, more difficulty climbing, like kind of basic explanations like that, and that's usually enough. It is important to discuss things like other kids can't catch it, or the child was born with this, it's not their fault. And It can be helpful also to frame things in terms of everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. And most kids, even at a kindergarten age, understand that everybody's good at some things and everybody has things that they're not so good at. That can help be a way to kind of normalize it a little bit or make it a little bit more kind of mundane in a good sense, and helps kids, again, like I said, understand how that might apply to their own life if they were in a similar sort of situation. The younger kids, we usually recommend having some sort of physical example. So when my wife would go do this in my son's class, she would bring like those leg weights and she would like Velcro them to their legs and have them run around the room. And boy, gosh, don't your legs get tired, or isn't that hard? Or I had friends who would, actually they would get firemen's boots, like, because the firemen, you know, are they help out with the MDA and fundraising, so they knew their local firemen, and they got a pair of their big boots, and they had them put them on, and they had a kid run in the class wearing the fireman's boots, and they would fall, and everyone would laugh, but it's probably like a liability. But anyway, some sort of physical example like that can really help it kind of, it really strikes home to kids about what that means on the playground, or what that means when we're in PE. It is also important to ask questions. You'll get some, you get some kids who ask like obvious questions because they didn't hear a word you said because they were thinking about riding their bike. But you also get some kids who ask questions because they want to show how much they know, and that's good too, because it gives you kind of, they're kind of repeating your message for you. But it's also helpful to think about, okay, what can we do to help Johnny or Joel or whatever? What can we do to help him on the playground? Does anybody have any ideas? And you have kids, kind of throwing out suggestions, and you can add a few of your own. That can be a way to start to prompt the support, the protecting, the including. Teachers sometimes don't know what to say about Duchenne. It's good to have a conversation with them and give them some sort of understanding about what's within bounds or what they need to kind of leave up to you, because there's going to be situations that come up in class where a kid might ask Johnny a question, or might ask the teacher, well, why can't he do this, or that sort of thing. So sometimes giving teachers permission to provide some basic information can be good, because then they know, okay, I know what I can say, I know what I can't say. That just kind of gives them more of a yardstick about, it helps them feel more comfortable about how to negotiate or navigate those situations. It can be helpful also to educate your teacher a little bit about Duchenne. I found that different teachers want varying degrees of information. There's a publication that PPMD has developed called Education Matters, which is awesome, and I've helped with writing, so I can say that, writing part of it. But it's really good. It is a really good resource. There's also kind of more streamlined versions that give a little bit less information for teachers who maybe kind of can't digest that much information. But it's also important, because this can be kind of very objective, scientific sounding, or kind of disembodied, if you will. And so it can also be helpful to give your teacher kind of a one-page summary specifically about your child. It personalizes things. So, put a cute picture at the top, attach a Starbucks card with the one-page summary, bribery goes a long way sometimes. But you want to describe, here's what I like, here's what I'm good at. You'll know that I'm having difficulty when you see these signs. Here's what you can do to help out. In just kind of a brief, kind of personalized sort of way. That can help put a name and a face to a condition, and helps make a connection between the teacher and that child. Now, siblings oftentimes, they're a part of medical visits oftentimes, they're part of discussions, they're always there. And it's important to make sure that you're taking time to talk with siblings about Duchenne. And initially, that's going to be more of a discussion about what it is and what it means, and you're going to gauge the level of sophistication based on how old they are. It's also, over time, that conversation is also going to cover, well, how does Duchenne impact you? Like, how do you feel being the sibling of a child with Duchenne? And it can be tough sometimes to have a sibling who has Duchenne. It's kind of like, unfortunately, I hate to say it, in our family, one of our kids takes 90% of our parenting, and the other, there's only kind of 10% left over for the other one. Fortunately, she's very sweet and mature and responsible so far, but that's the way it is, and we have to make sure that we acknowledge that, and that we're communicating sometimes our regret or sometimes the unfairness of that to that other sibling, and acknowledging that. And there's a program, is it tomorrow? Anyway, Jill Castle, who's a really good friend and colleague and has worked a lot with this sort of thing. She's doing SIB Shop tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, which is a program one of these days, maybe Saturday, I can't remember. Anyway, she's doing a program specifically for siblings, and this is a program that has been used in other medical models or other conditions for siblings of kids who have chronic medical conditions. So it's a good program, but it is important to make sure that we don't overlook them. It's also important to make sure that we don't put excessive burden upon the siblings. I think as a parent, when we get run down and we're tired and we're busy and stressed, and you have a sibling who's very mature and intelligent and responsible, it's easy to kind of shunt some of the responsibility onto them. And over time, it can be easy, it can be tempting to actually just kind of expect that of them. And it's really important to avoid that. And it's one thing to say, gosh, thank you so much for helping me out with your brother today. It's another thing to say, oh, I couldn't have done it without you. You're my lifeline. You're my salvation. And kind of really starting to put that emotional burden upon that other sibling. It's also important to spend time with them not talking about Duchenne and doing other things and nurturing them. I'm the crazy, obsessive youth soccer dad for our daughter, and so that's my role outside of Duchenne, which she probably doesn't appreciate that, but you know, at least I try. So tomorrow at 2:30? Okay. So I'm that dad, the one who yells from the sideline, but I try not to be. So anyway, all right. I think that's it for me. I would like to say thank you to Dr. Schoenfeld, who's a physician who's really done a lot in covering these topics that I talked about, and I basically stole most of my information from him. But there's also some other people as well, Louise Hastings and Janet Hoskin from the UK, and I didn't put it on here, but actually the women, as part of the Australia group, affiliated with Australia group Save Our Sons, and Western Australia Duchenne group, do an awesome job with this stuff, and I just wanted to give them a quick shout out. So,
Next is Amy Wagers.
Hi, I'm Amy Wagner. I'm here to talk about early identification of boys with DMD and what that means from a socio-emotional perspective and what that means from an educational perspective. So I work closely with University of California, Davis, and I'm currently at University of Wisconsin. And I'm also collaborating really heavily with Ann Connolly at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm very grateful to her for allowing me to share her data with you today. So as you know, DMD is not just a muscle disorder, but it is a multi-system disorder. So it does affect the brain, as we have been talking about, and can possibly lead to learning difficulties, attention difficulties, language delays. It affects the heart, it affects the lungs, and the muscles and the bones. So it is a complex disorder. There's a lot of individual differences, as we've been discussing this whole time. Really, each child is different in how DMD affects them, but knowing kind of what the possibilities are and what the data shows can help you identify what's going on with your individual child easier, so you can make sense of some of the behavior that you may be seeing with them. So when we're looking at young children with DMD, so kids under the age of 5, there has been data that there's cognitive delays in these boys. Not all of them, but in general, the average is 1 to 1.5 standard deviations below the mean. And I'll show you some graphs in a minute that kind of helps you understand what that means. And about 1/3 of boys with DMD experience cognitive delays. So this is something that you as a parent, if you've just gone through the diagnostic process, you can kind of look out for that as something that you might need to deal with as well. Hopefully not, but it might be something that you would need to be thinking about. Often boys with DMD have language delay, and sometimes language delay is the first symptom you notice, and then DMD will get diagnosed. So that's not an uncommon pathway to get to a DMD diagnosis, is to notice a language delay and then later get a diagnosis of DMD. And James's work has showed that there is a higher incidence of boys with ADD, ADHD, and OCD. So attention deficit disorder, attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity, and obsessive compulsive disorder. And there's also this connection that's recently coming up in the literature that there is a connection between DMD and autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. So boys with DMD are sometimes at a higher risk for having autism-like behaviors, so some of these repetitive behaviors, rigidity, tantrums, those types of things. And so the incidence is relatively low, but the research right now, there's a huge range, and it depends on how they defined autism and how it was diagnosed and all of those complicating factors. But the rates right now in the research are between 3.1 and 19.6%. So just know that that is the case, and that sometimes your child just might be having a bad day or a bad week. We all have those. But sometimes if you're seeing this behavior over a long period of time and it's concerning to you, this might be something that you would talk to your physician about, maybe looking into. So with the care considerations that have been discussed in almost every talk today, there is this new iteration of the care considerations have a part 3, so it's actually a separate paper just talking about managing the social-emotional effects of DMD. And the recommendations basically say that we should monitor the physical and developmental milestones, so in all domains, including cognitive, so their learning and intellect, including language, both expressive and receptive, and social-emotional. So really monitoring those over time, and being aware of the kind of neuropsychological and neurodevelopmental issues that I just discussed in the previous slides. So knowing that there's a higher incidence of this, being aware and monitoring and trying to look at your child's behavior through those lenses. And then also, if you're noticing concerns or you're at all worried about this, making sure that you refer your child to a psychologist or a neuropsychologist to get these kinds of developmental assessments and or specific assessments for autism spectrum disorder, if that is what you are worried about. And then also helping the family really get connected to special ed. And so this is where my work comes in. I'm a kindergarten teacher by training. I also am a certified therapist for working with infants and toddlers with autism. And so when I was working at UC Davis with Eric Henriksen, and he's the DMD guy, and I was a special ed person, we really connected over, wait a minute, there's this overlap, and your medical model isn't connecting to my educational model, and how can we link these two models? So families with kids with DMD who are experiencing both the medical side of the condition and or some of these more educational, psychological, social-emotional difficulties can get help in the educational field and with social workers and that kind of work. So that's kind of where this collaboration came from, and where I hope the field of DMD is going, in terms of really make sure that we're supporting families and children in all areas of development in a more holistic way, so that we're not just dealing with the muscle part of the disease, but also the brain part of the disease and the social, emotional, and behavior part of the disease that we know is happening. We're also, the care considerations really say that we want to identify these community resources and make sure that we're helping parents be able to cope with these difficulties. Having a child who throws frequent tantrums is exhausting, and we want to make sure that families are getting the support that they need in order to deal with those behaviors, and the psychological fallout of the child dealing with the diagnosis and you dealing with the diagnosis, and making sure that we're dealing with the whole family system together. So I talked a little bit about this, but one thing, if you are a family of a newly diagnosed boy, is that but the care considerations recommend getting a neuropsychological evaluation relatively early, so in the first year of diagnosis. And part of this is just to tackle it all right away and get a baseline of kind of where is your child at the beginning, and then do you notice declines over time, or is this something that you're not worried about over time and you can kind of just check that off your box and not worry about that, which would be a huge relief. And then having reevaluations every 2 to 3 years just to stay on top of this, because we know that there's higher incidences of these kinds of issues with boys with DMD, and just staying on top of it means that you might catch something early, and the key to early intervention is that it's effective. The research shows that the earlier you intervene in cognitive, language, social-emotional, and autistic-like behaviors, the better the outcomes are for children over time. This can be especially important for boys with DMD, as if they become immobile later on, they then have the language they need to express what they need to you and or their other caregivers. They have the social-emotional ability to regulate themselves when they are frustrated, which I imagine is very, very strong feeling in that stage of the disease. And I also think really making sure that you're dealing with the whole child all the time, and not just thinking about their physical therapy and their muscles, but everything about the child that is going to make them reach their full potential and be well-adjusted and happy. So I'm going to quickly go over Anne Connolly's data, talking about, she did one of the first studies of infants and young boys with DMD, and they used a developmental assessment tool called the Bailey, which looks at all domains of development, and it's really the gold standard of developmental testing. And so they had 6 locations around the country and 5 within the US, and then 1 in the UK. And it was a small study because, as you know, getting diagnosed this young is difficult and challenging. So they enrolled 24 boys with DMD that were under the age of 3. And what they did was they tracked their development over time. So whenever they were diagnosed, they did a Bailey assessment, and then they did one every 6 months after that until the child aged out of the Bailey, which goes up until 42 months of age. So if they were diagnosed like through newborn screening, for example, they would get one at 6 months, 12 months, all the way up to 42 months. If they were diagnosed at 36 months, they would only have 2 time points. So when you're looking at the distribution, so really thinking here, so the line, the hill, basically, is typical development, what we would expect. The bars represent where the boys with DMD fell in comparison to typical development. So this is basically showing that there's a significant delay in the motor area in this group of boys, which was probably not a surprise to you. But what's interesting is that they also found a statistically significant delay in both the language and the cognitive areas for these young boys with DMD. So these delays are occurring early on, and this doesn't mean this is occurring for every single boy in the sample. It just means that overall, in general, when you average the scores together, there's a trend that it is about 1 standard deviation below the mean. This looks crazy, but what I want to show here is just, this is the individual difference of the boys in this group. It is all over the map. So when we're talking about this, I don't want you to think this is going to happen to my child, this is what I should be expecting. Know that there's huge variance in each child with DMD. But overall, you can see that the typical score on the Bailey is a 10, and the DMD score in the cognitive skilled scores was 7.9. But look at that variability. Some of the boys decrease over time, and some of them increase over time. And so we don't know why. We kind of don't know what to expect here, and so this is an area of research that's occurring right now. When we look at expressive language scores, Anne Connolly's study found that over time, there was a delay in the beginning, and over time that delay tended to stay. And the social-emotional scores also had a delay in the beginning and then stayed over time. What's interesting again with social-emotional is look at the variability here. That to me is very powerful, to think about where some of our boys with DMD are really struggling and where some of their behavior challenges might be coming from. Here's the receptive language scores. You can see instead of a straight line here, the red dotted curve shows that actually the boys' scores increased over time. So their receptive language abilities improved over time, which is really interesting and brings us hope. And gross motor declined over time, as we would expect. So in my study, building off of Ann Connolly's research, I did an online study using developmental screening tools to look at, are we seeing a higher level of risk? So a screener, the Bailey can detect developmental delay. A developmental screener cannot diagnose or say definitively, yes, your child has this particular problem. What it can say is, there are some concerns here that we might want to look into further assessment. So often when you're like, should I be concerned about this or not? Filling out a developmental screener or a screener about challenging behaviors can give the parent and or the physician the ability to say, yeah, you know what? It looks like these concerns are valid. Maybe we should go for the full assessments. Those assessments can be timely and expensive, and so doing that screener is often a first step that teachers, parents, and or physicians can do. So I recruited a group of boys with DMD and a group of boys that did not have DMD. They were basically comparable, except my control group had higher income and was a little bit older. So this is a problem with the design, so you should take these findings with a little bit of skepticism. So I did 3 groups of screening tools. The first was the ASQ, so the Ages and Stages questionnaire. And just for your information, if you're interested in this, if you go on Easter Seal's website, you can do an ASQ for free, and it will give you the results right back to you. So if you just put in your Google line, like ASQ and Easter Seals, you're golden. I also did the ASQ social-emotional version. The SDQ is the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which really looks at challenging behaviors. And then I did autism screeners, so the SRS, which is the social responsiveness scale. Because little kids develop so quickly and change so quickly, there's many different versions depending on how old your child is. So that's why you see so many of these listed here. Let me show you what I found. So in the ASQ, it divides it by developmental domain. So basically, my basic question through this study was, do the boys with DMD show up in the at-risk category? So these concerns would, this child would benefit from further evaluation. Do boys with DMD fall in that category more often than the boys without DMD? And what I found was the ASQ in the communication, gross motor, fine motor, and personal social domains, that the boys with DMD did actually show up in the concern range more often than the boys without DMD. In problem solving, I didn't find a difference. It's interesting. The ASQ social-emotional scale, really looking at social-emotional behaviors, also showed that there was a statistical significant difference that boys with DMD were more likely to fall in the at-risk range on this. And so looking at challenging behaviors, so things like tantrums, rigidity, sleep problems, eating problems, were boys with DMD at risk in these behaviors? And for emotional symptoms, conduct problems, peer problems, and overall in general, yes, boys with DMD did fall in this range more frequently. So thinking about that, also looking at autism. So again, this autism screener cannot say, yes, your child has autism. This is just, yeah, your child is showing enough symptoms of autism. It might behoove you to get a further autism assessment. What I found was that overall, like the screening cutoffs, when I looked at the moderate and severe risk range on the autism screener, the boys with DMD didn't overall show further risk. Only in the social motivation category, that was it. But when I was more liberal with my criteria, and I included the mild risk of autism, so not just the moderate and severe, but the mild risk, where you're showing some of these autistic-like behaviors that could affect your day-to-day life, but it might not be a full-blown diagnosis of autism, the boys with DMD did fall in that category in terms of social motivation, restricted interests and repetitive behavior, social communication interaction, and a total score. So what this shows is that maybe our boys with DMD are showing some of these autistic-like behaviors, even though they might not meet the full criteria of autism. I don't know, that's a guess of my interpretation. Without full autism assessments, I can't say that for certain. So what does this mean for you as a parent of a young child with DMD? So just knowing that there are these early and relatively stable deficits in cognitive, expressive language, and social-emotional domains in addition to gross motor can help you be a better advocate for your child. So can help you with the school district and the early intervention services really advocate, like, no, look, there is this connection between DMD and these delays, so yeah, my kid needs this assessment. Do it, please. That sometimes school districts can say, he looks fine, he doesn't need that. But if you have this kind of data, you can go to them and say, look, I have a really valid reason for asking for this assessment. And you and your physician or developmental pediatrician can really advocate with the school district or the early intervention services to get these full-blown assessments. Also, that there are some improvements over time. So this is good. The language that you're using with your children can make improvements. So things like early intervention can make a difference in these kinds of behavioral, language, and cognitive deficits. Also, being able to advocate with your physician to use some of these developmental screeners, to say, hey, I went to this thing and I heard about developmental screeners. Can we do that on Jimmy? So that then, if you notice concerns, you can then bring that to the developmental pediatrician and or the school district or early intervention and say, look, my pediatrician is recommending this because we filled out this screener and here's where it showed we might have possible concerns about my particular child's behavior. And look, there's this research study that says this is in general showing up in young boys with DMD. So please do this full assessment. And some behaviors may pose more significant challenges in daily living and might be modifiable with early intervention programs. So I know when I was doing intervention with young children with autism, tantrums were a huge issue for families, and the behavioral intervention that you can learn to do with the specialists, and if you do it consistently and you teach your child's teacher how to do that, it can decrease those tantrums over time. There is hope for those behavioral challenges that drive you crazy and make you exhausted. So know that these kinds of interventions really can make a difference for your children. So instead of watching and waiting, really advocate with your pediatrician, the early intervention program, and the school districts for full assessments. Just knowing that cognitive and social function should be systematically addressed, and that you are your child's best advocate. So having this information in your pocket can help you really get your child the early intervention services that can make a difference. There are some questions about advocacy, and one of the things I see from looking at this data is that as a community, if we could advocate to get Duchenne muscular dystrophy on the list of established conditions for early intervention and special education in each state, that would mean each family individually doesn't have to have this fight. But we can unite and do this together so that when a new family has a boy diagnosed with DMD, they go in and they're on the list, DMD's on the list of established conditions, makes it much easier for them to get a full assessment and to qualify for intervention services. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Amy. We so appreciate your talk. Our last speaker of this session is Denise Gruender. Denise is going to talk to you about how to manage behaviors both at school and at home.
Always, I'm right before lunch. Sorry. I'll try to go quickly. So I think I want to sell my company and just follow Amy and James around and learn more. It's exciting to hear all that they just talked about, but now hopefully I can help you tie that together on how your everyday can help it in your own home. So I started a company almost 30 years ago. I think I was 10. ABC Educational Services. We do all kinds of little things. Testing, we can help. If you lived in North Carolina, I'd help you in 3 seconds flat. But why am I here? I can talk about test scores. I can look at what should you be doing. Do you want to do that privately? Do you want to do that publicly? School system does it. They own your test results. They know what's going on with that child. You get the 80-year-old teacher, oh my, I don't know what to do with him. You get these new teachers, they know everything and they can really help you. So I can help decide what kind of testing, where, when, how, and who to share those results with. Insurance is amazing things. I can tell you how to get to the direct line of your insurance company. We lie. Oh, did I say that? They want a pediatrician to have referred you, but I can teach you how to go around that, and it helps a little bit to get where you need to be. We have occupational therapy, speech pathologists. We can play that game today. If anybody wants to sit down with me one-on-one, we can call in an expert if we want to ask extra questions to our people back at home. We also have a language stimulation school, and I think we address many of what Amy was talking about, all kinds of issues. There are language stimulation schools all over the place, and there are public schools that address these kind of issues, and they understand your child. It's the language delay. That sensory. We either want to touch too much or we don't want to be touched at all. How do these children process? And some are delayed, some are way ahead, and we can help you figure out where that child is. Autism spectrum, you mentioned it, we see it. And in these children with Duchenne, they are only showing 4 or 5 sections of what we see on this whole diagnosis, and I have all kinds of little charts that I can show you on how you can address those things at home and at school, and how you can go from school to home and home to school. A child normally cannot hold it together all day long. They are going to be total poops at home or at school. And so where do we get the most, and how can we make that bridge from school to home work better every day? Eating, feeding is huge. We have all kinds of little tricks up our sleeves. They've both mentioned that it's a problem, but go to the pottery place. You paint your own pottery and you paint your own place, and then you get to color in that plate, and then it's fired, and that's what we get to eat off of, because you only have to eat 5 bites of protein, and they can pick it off and put it on their colored plate, so that, I only have to have 5 bites, this is good, and you know what? You have timers that are visual timers. Everybody should have one of these. They don't go ding, so that we don't know when the timer's going off. I can help you order these. But it also counts for us. If you have 12 bites, that means you get 12 minutes on your iPad. And so we bribe. It's a great word. So go ahead and make your own special plates. Make your dining room table the most exciting place in the whole wide world. These are the things that we see every day at our language preschool. Cannot sit in circle time. I've already had 3 parents come up to me and said, okay, the preschool teacher is about done with us. That's okay. Preschool teachers have patience. They are moms too. We bite, we hit, we have tears, we can't understand directions. And then again, all the diet issues. So in preschool, if you're seeing any of those things, I can help you what to say to the teachers, and I can help you do what you need to be doing at home, because sitting at the kitchen table for 5 minutes does wonders for someone learning how to sit in preschool circle time. And then tomorrow we're going to go 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and soon we're going to be able to sit to 20 minutes. But you got to start slow at home, all right? Grade school. We start entering grade school, first, second, third grade, and we end up with all kinds of other things going on. The struggle with friendship is huge, and I can help you with some of the social things we do. A couple of parents have said to me, thank you so much. Last year you gave me some great ideas. Some have worked. It's a crapshoot, to be honest. Some will work, some won't. And you've got to try, and I would say every month you're going to be trying something new and changing up. Behavior charts. We have all kinds of behavior charts. I brought it all with me, and we can have a make it and take it. I even have a laminator. So we can laminate things. Yeah, I'm a teacher. You'll get excited too. But if you come out and hang with me, let's make some behavior charts that you can take home. At home, you'll do the behavior chart, and you get to take it to school and show your teacher what a great night you had. That's exciting. And so then we take things back and forth, and that's why it's laminated. So behavior, meltdowns, avoiding eye contact. You can start that at dinner time, because if you work at it on dinner time, it's going to help in our regular classroom every single day. I can help you define learning disabilities. I can show you where your child might fall on that bell curve that Amy was showing. Some of these bell curves, if you need repetition, I did on the multiplication tables. I don't think I ever got them. But your bell curve, if you are an average person, and now you can test yourselves right now, the studies show you need 26 to 28 repetitions if you're average to get something. No wonder I can only do 6 times 8 equals 48, because it's a rhyme. So, but I didn't have to do that one 26 to 28 repetitions. When somebody asks you, can I help you? Guess what? When a child is not at average and they're slightly below, they need more than 26 repetitions. Ask them to tutor for you. Now, I would ask them to cook dinner for me and have dinner every night delivered to my house. But if they tutor your children just a half hour, because you're going to get more repetition. So I can help you figure that out as well. So all I'm here to do is help you create a successful childhood, because it's fun, and learning should be fun, home should be fun. When you have those meltdowns, I can teach you how you have a special place in your house that you can go melt down. Dads can go there, kids can go there, but we're not allowed to. Moms can go there, and yes, the wine can be hidden in the cupboard. But you aren't allowed to melt down in our house. You have to go to the special place. And we set up special places in everyone's home. I go into homes, we restructure houses. We have a little purple chair that you can go sit in or under, whatever you want. But that's your own special time. And when you feel ready to blow, you can go there. Here are my facts. You got to learn to say no. You have to be a tough parent. You have to be a little bit ugly. And you've just been given this diagnosis, and you say to me, yeah, right, Denise, I am not going to be ugly to my baby. Yes, you are. Because you have to have structure. And in order to have structure in that home, you have to say no. You have to be mean and tough, because that's what a child really does need, that structure, and they need to be told no. They will keep pushing you till you say yes. And that's our problem, because we bend too easily. All of us do. Visual timers, and when someone asks to help, you need your refill time. You got to fill back up your pitcher. And not that I ever did that for Pat Furlong or anything. She'd have to go shopping or something, and I would have to go down and play. I played school so many hours. Poor Patrick and Christopher and Michelle and Jenny, that's all I wanted to do. Girls, guys, you want to play school? And we'd play school for hours while Pat shopped a little. But it was the way she could refill her tank. And if you can refill your tank, you will be 10 times better in parenting, and you will have your patience. Bring in those experts, and you just heard about them. come to a place like me. I have a cell phone number, and I will be glad to give it to you. You can call me anytime. I don't volunteer in schools anymore. My kids are graduated. So I'm not there. I'm not making brownies. I will help you. So if you just want to talk and get a second opinion, I can connect you to who you might need to talk to. Schedule one-on-one with me. I'd love to sit down with each and every one of you to talk about what's going on in your home or in your school situation. Out front where you signed in, there's a sign-up sheet that says meet with Denise, sign up. If all of a sudden somebody up here is more exciting and you blow me off, I will not be offended. Schedule another time and come back out and I won't talk about you. Make it and take it. As I said, I brought everything that I could fit on the suitcase. Those people at the airport love me. Paper stopped me this time. The laminator didn't stop me going through security. It was all the stacks of papers. I have some handouts, all kinds of things you might want. If your child is here, if you'd like me to observe your child, I'd be glad to go do that. Do a little informal assessment, give you an idea of what we see in our school and how we could help you, what you need to be doing. And if you have test results, a lot of people have them scanned on your phone. I can look at those and help you decode. Behavior charts, schedule sticks. Schedule sticks. What is a schedule stick? When we need structure, we can't just say, okay, time to go, because you're thinking, oh, time to go, let's go, we're leaving the park. Bull, you've just lost it. You are not allowed to say to your child, all right, time to go. You need to give them a warning. And whether you carry around this or there is a visual timer on your phone, you just get to move this and say, in 5 minutes, we are leaving the park. He doesn't want to leave the park. Well, he knows that if he leaves the park, he gets to rip that off, and he knows what's coming next and next and next. Yes, we're a little OCD, and we need to know what's going on, but this gets him through the day. These can be I got all these with us, and there's Velcro. So, laminating and Velcro. I know you're feeling special now. So we can make all of this. I can teach you how to make your own weighted blanket. Mothers, we need this more than the kids, but that's okay. And I can teach you how to make a rule wall, because every home has to have a rule wall. And we write the rules that we don't do this. We don't leave the park crying. We don't ask for blah, blah, blah before we do blah, blah, blah. And you make your own rule wall. So I'll teach you how to do that. So I think those are all my slides. Sign up. Oh, they both said read Education Matters. I asked all of our teachers to read it and all of our therapists at my ABC school. And they said, Denise, that's a lot of stuff. I said, I know, read it. And they said, tell your parents to go through that. And I think it was you, James, create your own special one. We just say highlight it. Go through and highlight before you give anything to your teachers. Sticky tabs, highlight anything you can, because a teacher is overwhelmed when they see that packet of 7 pages. Well, is this really their kid? Yes, it is really their kid, but if you've gone through and highlighted, that's what makes it stand out, what they need from you, okay? And again, a Starbucks, a cookie. Teachers, I am a teacher. I was a teacher a long time ago, but teachers love lunch. Take them lunch once a month, and it can be egg salad sandwich. I mean, anything. They will think they've died and gone to heaven just because you are respectful of their time. So there you go. I look forward to meeting each one of you.
So we have a little time for questions. Amy, and forgive me for saying Wagers. I have a friend, Amy Wagers, and it's Amy Wagner, so that's my correction, and shoot me if I keep screwing that up. And Denise, as you know, I think I mentioned last night, Denise lived on our street when we first moved there, and I recruited her at 11 to be our babysitter, and she kept 4 kids from killing each other, so I felt that that was a successful person in my family. And we did have rules in our family. I didn't necessarily adhere, but the children did, so that was always useful. And James, James has been with this organization for 100 years. He's our eye candy, and certainly all of these people contribute to our behavior. So if you have
someone
questions,
has to be.
Someone has to be. No, it's true. Someone has to be. So who has a question? All hungry?
All hungry.
Okay, so if there are no questions. Okay, good.
Okay, so Denise, this is for you, and we're gonna come visit you.
Okay.
So we just started speech and language therapy. So I am a very get to the point, get the diagnosis, I wanna know what I'm doing. So I've been talking to our therapist about if we think there's a possible sensory processing disorder, if he would be good in a normal class setting, or if he needed to look more into the special ed setting. The answer I literally got was, it's too early to look into this. And I kind of want to know how to address that.
How old is your child, did you say?
He's 3.5.
And I hate to agree with that, but sometimes it is a little too early because preschools are wonderful because they can take every realm of child, 3.5 to up 4. All of a sudden around 4, 4.5, we start seeing that we can label that child a little bit better because they just don't want to label a child that early. And preschool, if you're following discipline at home and discipline at school, we can take those behaviors and get them ready to roll. In your speech and language, ask to make sure that you can spend the last 5 minutes of every session to just learn so that you can repeat speech and language therapy at $115 an hour. You can repeat that all afternoon, all evening. My therapist, when my child just needed a little bit of articulation, she taught me everything to do. We did it 5 times a day, and we were done in 5 sessions. So that's not going to be probably your case for that situation, but the more you can do, the better off you're going to be. And yes, let's give it about 6 more months, and then relook at that reason to do special ed or regular ed.
All right, thank you.
To that real quick, sorry. And I don't necessarily contradict that, but what I would say is that sensory processing, like sensory hypersensitivities, they always happen in the context of something else. So it's usually anxiety or some impulsivity, ADHD kinds of behaviors. In some cases, it's ASD stuff. So I think the bigger question is, well, you want to make sure that you're getting an answer to what underlying thing those sensory things might be associated with, and make sure that that's being addressed.
Yes, that's one of my biggest things is he just recently started doing more things associated with a sensory disorder. So I didn't know if that was kind of normal. But like we've been having difficulties with certain things on his hands and throwing a tantrum until they're cleaned off. Transitioning from one project to another, he has full-blown 20-minute meltdowns.
Thing that we see, anxiety is the biggest thing that we see associated with sensory hypersensitivities. So, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Hello? Oh, there we go. If I can add to, I think also if you're worried, I would justify that worry and feel like at this point he's 3.5, so if you have concerns, you could call the school district that he would go to if he was a kindergartner and ask them for an occupational therapy assessment. And they're screeners for sensory processing disorders that you can ask them to fill out ahead of time to give you some more information. And it wouldn't hurt to call them now. It often takes 6 months for them to actually set up that assessment anyway. So then you would hit Denise's timeline if you're willing to wait. So there are strategies that OTs can give you about things that can help your child regulate with the things that are challenging in terms of sensory integration, and those strategies can be life-changing. So I would make that phone call, not to contradict you, Denise, but there's usually a long delay between the phone call and the actual assessment, so I feel like I would get on it, but it, of course, is your decision.
Other questions? Okay, lunch is served outside. I think it's outside. If it's not outside, ask, but I think it is. And we begin again at 1 o'clock. Thank you.